That's what I'm doing every single day, is writing music. So, you know, when you're sitting with somebody, you know, even though you're older than them and even though, you know, you've been doing this for longer, we're all still faced with the same challenges. What comes next? How does it fit together? How do these layers work? You know, things like that. So I really enjoy it because, you know, it's sort of, especially now, it's sort of this increasing fragmentation of culture where we don't all listen to exactly the same songs or read the same books, and so, you know, there's always new energy being injected into things, and I have a pretty good idea of what's out there in terms of what's happening in festivals, what's happening in different labels and in different cities, because I travel a lot, and so I sort of feel like I can bring that back, you know, and see how these things meet.
I really like that. I mean, all the lecturers are practitioners. A couple of them write also, but everybody plays, conducts, composes in some way. Yeah, it's cool. We're all researchers. Brunel is a research-intensive university, so I like to say you're working with professionals who are out in the profession.
I've done a zigzag route over the years. Started as a classical musician, and I like to say sometimes in more flippant moments that I've spent the last 25 years trying to undo being a classical musician. It's not strictly as simple as that, but I've enjoyed working with other kinds of music, other kinds of musicians as well, jazz musicians, pop musicians, singer-songwriters, electronic musicians, and also with, you know, other art forms like dance, theatre, poetry.
You're not dealing with theorists, you're dealing with real workers who have big national and international careers. And yeah, they're all practitioners. We call that research practice-led research. So we practice, then we examine it. We don't just look at cold manuscripts and make intellectual judgments. We are doing stuff, and then we use that learning and that craft to bring back into the teaching.
People that are making the music are actually teaching the music, which is an interesting aspect of any kind of creative course. So it's a very sort of practical, hands-on, project-based way of studying music, which I think is, for musicians, is much more important. Yeah, it speaks more. This for me has always been the best way of learning art.
I think we're all professionals. That's the other thing, is so that we're active, you know, in terms of having performances, being out there in the real world, seeing what the landscape is like, and adjusting what we're teaching our students to fit that. So, for example, you know, I'll do everything from sort of, you're sitting with somebody and you're saying, okay, what do you like to do? What do you want to do? Okay, let's try, and you work out this program that's very individual to them. But at the same time, you're thinking, okay, this sort of work that they're doing, maybe we can get it programmed here. Or, you know, maybe they should change the notation of this because it's more likely that that piece might work here, you know, with this ensemble or this competition or something. So I think that we pride ourselves on that sort of constructive approach, that sort of individual, almost boutique or bespoke, you know, approach, and I think that's why we get students that work in so many different arenas, and they go out feeling very confident.
We take in classical musicians, jazz musicians, pop musicians, singer-songwriters, composers, electronic musicians, and they're all kind of put together in the first year with the curriculum, and it's an interesting mix. And I think that one of the key things about Brunel is we encourage people to learn from each other.
I think it's really important to have people at both ends of the spectrum and people who will argue with one another, because it's boring otherwise.
We start to see students who've come in very much of one type suddenly switching and becoming another type of musician, and obviously being able to switch back or again in their third year, so that their pathway becomes interesting and unexpected. And I guess both those two words are key to our aims for our students.
We're not spending a lot of time, in general, not spending a lot of time on repertoire. I mean, you do learn repertoire, but you're not going to spend your life learning how to write Debussy or learning how to write Bach. While you learn the techniques, that's not what's the most important part.
The idea of labelling is interesting, because you go in, or we used to go in record stores where we'd seek out the label we thought was appropriate, and of course the tail end of that history of record shops, it soon became obvious to anyone who went in one that you couldn't really find what you wanted because there was always new kinds of categories of music, and the listeners become more and more sort of eclectic, I suppose. So those labels have sort of disappeared. They've disappeared in the shop, and I think they've also disappeared largely in a lot of people's thinking. And I think at Brunel we would encourage that even further, because there's nothing to stop a DJ musician getting involved, scoring out for a string quartet if they're able to, and we would encourage that and think actually that might be a much more interesting string quartet.
The idea is that we're looking at the students and we're saying, you know, how can we construct what they need to learn? How, you know, we're always responding to their needs, and I think this is something that people want more and more and more, especially with the growth of online education. The fact that, you know, you can be in a room with somebody who's listening to you and saying, okay, you're interested in this, have you heard about this, this and this, and okay, you want to do this, so why don't we try this and learn this piece of software, or, you know, check out this artist's work. I think that that's something that's valued even more, because you're not going to get that in a MOOC, you know, these huge online courses.
Introducing students to things they may not have heard before is one of our kind of key linchpins of teaching, so that they're starting to question what that music is.
I do think we're probably, you know, our approach is, it's quite progressive in that way, because we are really trying to just sort of focus on that individual development. And the new undergraduate structure that we have really reflects that, with these sort of people come in and they do everything, and then there's these increasing levels of specialization as they progress, so that the hope is, you know, people who are terrified of a computer come in and then end up being sonic arts, you know, major, because they think, oh, I can do this.
There's nothing sanitized or overly organized or, you know, cookie cutter. There's nothing like that about here. It is very much individualized, and I like that.
Certainly there's no house style. That I'm not encouraging everybody to do something like that, but not like that. We're dealing with kind of core issues. We're dealing with things about, if you've got material, what makes it sort of interesting. What can you do with your material once you've got it? What's appropriate to do with that material, given the instrumentation?
Conservatoires are wonderful places, but you're in a building that there's no other people except musicians. And I think it's good to be in an environment, you know, to sort of have all those other people around you, just rubbing elbows with them, you know. And it means that when you go to the library, there's, you know, you have access to books that you wouldn't have in a conservatoire library. So I think that is good. And certainly for a lot of the special projects I notice people do at Brunel, they will draw on friends, and I'll see students I've never seen before, you know, in any of the music classes, come in to help them out, either with programming or technical stuff, or just feet on the ground.
It is frameless, but there is guidance through this frameless world. And that's what we're doing.
And I think the challenge is you have to be on your toes. You can't phone it in. You know, we all had classes, all of the instructors here, where we had, you know, lecturers who came in and read from the same typewritten notes they'd been teaching from for 20 years, and that's not the model now. And I think that's great. I'd rather be in this sort of environment where I feel I'm learning and I'm thinking all the time.
It's not all a sort of free form, you know, let's go and make something and do it. But there is a lot of emphasis on people trying to find their own voice, I guess. Bit like, in that sense, kind of an art course. But along the way, obviously, we're encouraging them to sort of know what the possibilities are and what kind of ingredients you can take off the shelf, you know.
We want to see our students succeed. We want to see them in the real world, having their pieces performed at festivals. We want, you know, that's what we want to see. We want to see that excitement that they have here being only built on throughout their lives.